On January the 1st, 1979, China and the U.S. established diplomatic ties. After nearly 4 decades of ups and downs, the relationship between the world's largest two economies have come to a head. Cooperation or competition or even rivalry, some use the term, partners or enemies. What defines the relationship? What should be the nature of the relations? American political scientist Graham Allison has caught the world's attention for coining the term Thucydides Trap, which refers to the situation when a rising power causes fear in an established power, which escalates towards war. But he said Thucydides Trap is something both countries could avoid by doing the right things. Earlier this month, Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Donald Trump agreed to a 90-day reprieve from a war of tariffs. But what could happen next? What will it take to avoid a new Cold War? On the sidelines of the Understanding China International Conference, I sat down with Professor Allison for his insights. Professor Allison, what a pleasure to see you once again.
Pleasure for me to see you again.
First of all, is this a Cold War already, just in a different way, between China and the United States?
Yes and no, so it's complicated. The hard fact is that the strategic rationale that's been the basis for 4 decades of very productive relations between the U.S. and China has now collapsed. Completely collapsed in Washington and also in Beijing.
What is the sign of that collapsing?
So Confucius had a great statement in which he said the most important thing is to identify things by their real name. And the Trump administration is saying that what Americans identified as America's strategic partner under Obama and under Bush and under Clinton is not our strategic partner, is our strategic adversary. To the extent that that gets a hold on the consciousness of the American government and even the broader population, then this is going to be a very different relationship and quite dangerous. So basically, Thucydides explained to us how first you have the reality, then you have the perception and misperception, then you have the emotions, fear, and then that's combustible ingredients.
Build up upon each other.
So we should be saying, let's be calm, let's be clear-eyed, let's be realistic. Let's it's not about blame, it's about resolving issues, because we're either going to live together successfully or we could die together. So if those are the two choices, that's pretty easy.
Let's move it to another direction of the discussion. See where the two countries are.
Yes.
China, 40 years of reform and opening up. It's not only celebrating its achievements now. People are also talking about the daunting tasks ahead, particularly as a result of the current circumstances. Meanwhile, how much should they be open? How fast should they be reforming? And how much of the outside harsh or harsher circumstances should, in a way, be a positive influence back at home to push forward the agenda? That's what China has been discussing. So, Professor, it seems that the two countries are all in their own struggling of figuring out who they are right now. And what's the best way to deal with who they are right now?
You remind me why I enjoy talking to you.
Oh, Professor, I am so short of...
No, extremely thoughtful question, and it's packed with several elements. So first,
please enlighten us.
What is happening in China is mainly about China. And it has so many things to do inside its own borders, it doesn't even think what happens outside. That's not my problem. My problem is all the problems I have here today. In the U.S., mostly Americans are about America. Nancy Pelosi, who will be the new Speaker of the House, and Donald Trump are not thinking about China. They're thinking about American politics. Americans are thinking about what's happening at their income. So the external is almost secondary for both of them. Now for China, for too long, China has said to itself, we're only about growing up, and that our intention has nothing to do with you, and have neglected the fact that whatever your intention, your growth has consequences. So an inevitable consequence, not intended, but inevitable consequence of you're bigger and stronger means you're pressing up against me in ways that you never did before. And the purpose is not because you want to press up against me, it's just you want to be China. But if I'm now watching this, I look and I say, whoa, they're just pushing everywhere. So China used to be a little small economy. Now it's a big economy. China used to hardly have any supercomputers. Now it has the fastest supercomputers. But that's supposed to be American position. So Americans feel threatened by that, understandably. So the fact that by looking just at ourselves, which we usually do, we don't think what are the consequences for the other party, that's a big mistake. Now, Trump and Americans are feeling very uncomfortable about the failures of American society, American economy, American politics, Americans' failure to grow in a way that large parts of the society have been brought along. So most of the wealth creation since the great financial crisis of 2008 has gone to the top 1% of people. And half of the people have hardly got any benefits. Well, that's not because of China, that's because of America. But would you rather blame yourself or you rather blame me?
Of course, the latter.
I think, well, if you hadn't done these things, you know, this wouldn't be my problem. So I think, again, that's why sensible people, thoughtful people should be sitting down and say, whoa, my goodness, China has a lot of problems with China, let it work on this problem. Americans have a lot of problems with America, we should work on this one. We should be careful not to let this infect the relationship between the two of us.
But Professor Allison, you know much better than I do. The question is the speed of that,
yes.
The speed of soul searching, and the scale of soul searching.
Yes.
Knowing the U.S. politics as well as you do you think that soul searching process is going on, or very unlikely in the next few years? And as a result of that, what is the reality that we're talking about here?
Well, that's, again, a very good question. So if there's anybody that understands what's going on in Washington or in American politics, they have not spoken up. So Trump is a phenomenon nobody ever saw before. There are not any political leaders like him in American life or in the international stage that I've seen. So he's almost like a wild card. His administration is, one of my Chinese friends said that this week, he said, it's like the warring parties. The Chinese period of the warring parties, warring states within the administration. So we think we have a deal with Mnuchin, then there's no deal. Now we're trying to deal with Lancaster, but we're not sure where's Mnuchin.
But that's just the reality we have to deal with.
That's it. Okay, so very confusing. Then we have the big struggle in America is going on between Democrats and Republicans. The division is the sharpest ever. So
we saw that White House conversation, quote unquote,
exactly.
Conversation.
Yeah, the conversation with Xi Jinping was like my best friend as compared to this. So we're going through a very bad patch. That's number one. Number two, thoughtful Americans appreciate that American democracy today is dysfunctional. So our government is not working for most American people. It's failing. And if it continues doing this, then this is going to be a disaster for America, not for somebody else, for America, for Americans. So our first task is to reconstruct, rehabilitate, revivify our democracy for ourselves. It's not about China, that's about America. And that's a big task, I would say. So if I'm trying to find ways to escape Thucydides Trap, one idea that I'm exploring right now, we should find some way in which the Chinese government would say, we have so many problems inside China's border, we should focus on those. And Americans should say, we have so much problem, so much work to do at home, we should focus on those. So we should find a way between us to essentially freeze the situation. I would say we have bigger problems inside our countries than we have between us, even though we have serious problems between us.
What is this decoupling, so-called idea that has been pushed by some to you?
So there's a few big words. One is called New Cold War. Another one is called decoupling. Another one is called isolating. Isolating. So the thought is somehow you could isolate China from the global economy.
Can you?
I think you can say those words, but China is a backbone of the global economy. China is the major trading partner of every American ally and friend in Asia. So if you go to Australia or to Singapore or to Japan and you say, I have a good idea, you should decouple your economy to be friendly with us from China. They don't know what you're talking about. They say, do you know China is our major trading partner? China is essential for our economic growth. If my government were to do that and have an economic recession, I won't be the leader of the government.
But you know,
so this is not going to happen.
Professor
So people are talking nonsense.
People are talking about nonsense sometimes, but you know, it's just so hard if you have a suicide bomber.
Fortunately, nobody is in the situation intentionally suicidal. They may be the effect, but not the intention. So people are imagining that they could say, well, we will simply decouple China the way we did, or isolate China the way we did the Soviet Union in the Cold War. And I say, well, that's an interesting idea. Let's look at the facts. In 1950, when the U.S. adopted a Cold War strategy to isolate Soviet Union economically, Soviet Union was 10% the size of U.S. economy. And U.S. was 50% of the global economy. 2018, China is slightly bigger than the U.S. economy, and the U.S. is 14% of global economy. So the situation not the same. In 1950, the Soviet Union was an autarkic economy that only traded with other communist countries. It didn't have any trade with anybody. China is now the major trading partner of every American ally and friend. Indeed, of everybody else. I think there's 130 countries.
And also with America as well.
Yeah, of everybody. So people can say words that don't make sense until they begin to figure out. I mean, when I go to Washington and talk to people about that, I say simply, I hear your words, I hear the words, but I can't understand what does it mean. So tell me operationally, how does this work? And they say, well, and then they go, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah.
But what about the other sides? I mean, education, science and technology development, people-to-people relations. When you try to decouple, these frontiers will be so much setbacks.
If every Chinese student who comes to study STEMs, physics or biotech, and so if you say, well, he might be a spy getting information, so he's going to take it back to China, whatever. So we could see some slowdown in that. We could have some slowdown in tourism. We could have some slowdown in number of students at universities. That's not the end of the world. That's stupid, but not the end of the world. In the effort to, quote, decouple, you could have some people just throwing, wrenches into the spokes. The wheel is going to keep going. It's just not going to be as effective as it was before. Because ultimately, if the U.S. goes to its friends and allies and says, you have to choose between your relationship with China that's making you prosperous and your relationship with us, your security relationship, they say, I'm not going to choose. No, I'm not choosing. That's what the Australians have told the Americans. That's what the Japanese have told the Americans. That's what the Singaporeans. So you'd say, well, then I'm going to decouple without your becoming. What does it mean? And you can't deny reality. That's just, reality is reality.
To you, Professor Allison, we are running out of time, but very importantly, I mean, the two presidents, they met. They asked their teams to work together on a consensus about trade. Good news.
Yes.
Professor, from your perspective, with the good conscience you have for both sides, what is the best way and how can we deal with the bottom line?
So I'm slightly optimistic about what's going to happen now, because I've been listening very carefully to what Xi Jinping and the team is saying. So he's signaling very strongly that China is going to have a new surge of, he calls it deepening reform and comprehensive opening. And that's good, because he's not doing it for Donald Trump, he's doing this for China. It's fine for Donald Trump to claim what he claims, as long as we don't do any more damage. And it's fine for Xi Jinping to present it in whatever form it's good for China. That's good. So I suspect this may give us a framework in which we will then start negotiating on the other items for 6 more months, maybe for longer than that. Now, because this is still stuck in the Thucydidean downdraft, I think things will continue to get worse unless we come up with some other big strategic idea for a new basis for a relationship. And I think that'll be extremely difficult to do with the Trump administration. Not impossible.
What would be the areas B?
Well, I think it would be something that about, we've thought about how catastrophic war would be. So we're aware that we can't do that. So we're going to have a framework in which we learn to live together painfully, stressfully, in the security arena. And ideally, if it weren't the Trump administration, you would have something in the climate space, where we have to do something together. Then you'd have something in the trade space. So you could have the elements of this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Allison. I really learned a lot. To be continued,
To be
I hope.
continued, I hope.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.